Google for discussion questions, and I found some. Let me know whether I've zoomed in enough so that you can read my screen well.
Okay.
So let's begin. Is Howe better suited to be a king than Hotspur? Why or why not? What qualities make a good leader?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I mean that's the way that Hal is kind of is a bum who hangs out with Falstaff, and Shakespeare deliberately sets it up to show it that way. The comparison and the fact that the king, one of his speeches, how he reflects on, I'll bet they were switched at birth. What if this one is my son? And tries to make that reference, but
Yeah.
But again, sometimes being somebody that works hard for a cause is we often put more importance on that than whether or not the cause you're fighting for is just, and that can be part of the issue. However, here it's kind of up in the air about because Mortimer's claim to the throne is arguably stronger than the Lancasters' claim to the throne. So Shakespeare, of course, wrote under the understanding that Hotspur is the rebel and that he's the bad guy, but he kind of had to look at it that way. I mean, there's only so far that Shakespeare can go in saying that the rebels were on the right side rather than the people that were his king.
But he portrayed Hotspur in a very good light. Not only at the beginning, but also towards the end.
There's also the fact that in fact, this is a monologue that is not on the wheel for Wheel of Shakespeare, and I think it should be. I got to update that. Is after Act 1, Scene 2, where he had the scene of him with Falstaff, and then it closes. He does the direct address saying, about how, I'm being a bum now, but someday I'm going to grow up, and when I do, you're going to see me. You're going to see my redemption, and then in the follow-up play, we actually did that scene during Wheel of Shakespeare when the two bishops are talking about no sooner did his father die than he did a complete transformation. He changed. So there's that. There's also, I don't know if you're familiar, if you know this story, but this is about the comparison between Hotspur versus Hal as leaders. It illustrates, I think, the lesson that some people have made for playwrights that says, when you write a play based on real life, don't feel too bound by sticking to all the facts in real life. I'm always told that. Screenwriting professor I had at UCLA used to always tell the story about people say, well, this is the way it happened in real life. And he would tell the story. Okay, well, let me tell you about what happened this morning with, my breakfast and so forth. This is real life. It's boring. You're not interested in that. Be more concerned with what's interesting than what's true to real life. And another playwriting professor I had, he always say, authenticity is no excuse, is what he used to say. And Shakespeare really illustrates that. He took extensive liberties with the way he wrote, and one of them here is about Hotspur and Hal being about the same age, so they can make that comparison, and they can have King Henry lament about why is my son such a bum? Why can't he be more like Hotspur? That in reality, I don't know if you know this, I read this somewhere. I mean, this is talk about changing the facts of history. In reality, Hotspur was a couple years older than King Henry IV, and Shakespeare makes him the same age as the king's son, the king that he was actually older than, and I think it's, again, it's a gross distortion of the facts, but it does it for the sake of making it more interesting. It makes for the comparison that we're having right now in this question about to compare the two leaders. And if you're really if you're so concerned with Shakespeare being telling accurate history, that's the other thing they said. If you watch a play for a history lesson, you're a fool. I mean, that's not what it's about. It's about entertainment. And Shakespeare did, he took extensive liberties with history, but it was in this instance, it was a good choice to change history in that regard, because it allows us to think about this comparison between these two characters like we're having right now.
Hello, Vincent.
Vincent, you hear us? I think he's muted.
His picture froze. Vincent, can you hear me?
He's freezing.
All right. Vincent, are you there?
Yeah.
Anyhow,
I'm sure he'll try to get back in again soon.
Yeah. I agree with you regarding Shakespeare's liberties with the histories, but then again, he was a playwright, not a historian.
Yeah.
So it's normal. And regarding the Howe versus Hotspur, I believe they're portrayed as different kinds of leaders. So Howe uses more tactics, if you will, because initially he pretends to just play around, to be a party goer, not to take anything seriously, in order to acquaint himself with the average Joe, with the ordinary people, his future subjects. Whereas Hotspur is determined from the beginning of the play until the end. He's more straightforward. He's less complicated.
Well, you know what? It also could be argued that part of the reason why Hal that they're the same in many cases, and the only reason that Hal acts so different before the responsibilities of kingship are thrust upon him is because he is born knowing that he's going to be king, that the kind of things that are explored in the follow-up in Henry V, the Upon the King monologue, that great monologue about all the responsibilities he has, that he knows that. And unlike Hotspur, Hotspur he has to, he has to fight for Mortimer's, not his own, but he's related by marriage to Mortimer, who supposedly has the stronger claim to the throne, descended from the second son of Edward III, and that his claim, that he figures from the very beginning, if I want not my claim to the throne, but my allies' claim to the throne, I have to fight for it, versus how this different circumstances that he's brought up in, he from the very beginning, he knows he's going to be king someday. He knows he has that great responsibility. And and when Hotspur challenges it, and not necessarily waiting till his father dies and he actually becomes king, like the bishops say at the beginning of Henry V, but the expectation until Hotspur challenges his father's claim to the throne, and by so doing Hal's ultimate claim to the throne, that he kind of figures, I'm going to be king someday, and I'm going to have this immense responsibility. So therefore, I want to sow my wild oats while I'm young. I want to enjoy. I want to party. Live a life that has no responsibilities whatsoever. Because when Dad dies and I'm king, I'm going to have the most immense responsibilities in the world. So that might be another explanation. You could say that Hotspur is the more responsible of the two. Maybe not. Maybe it's just the fact that the different circumstances that Hal is brought up knowing. One of them's brought up knowing, if I want to be in power, I need to fight for it from the beginning. The other is brought up saying, well, I'm going to be in power, which is going to be an immense responsibility. Let me sow my wild oats while I'm young.
Excuse me, guys. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, but we can't see you.
Oh, hold on. Yeah. So this is your Zoom account, Alexander?
Yes. Okay, but I don't have the paid version, so we'll have to rejoin every 40 minutes.
Okay, because I invited some people and I used my account. So
okay, we can switch to yours if you wish.
Yeah, that might be a better.
Would you mind sending Mark and me a link?
It's the same link as the readings, but I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Then,
but to continue the conversation, I think it's important to point out that Hal, while he's sowing his wild oats with Falstaff, he's actually slipstreaming behind Falstaff and paying all of Falstaff's debts. So I think that he's showing a lot of responsibility beyond his age that maybe his father doesn't appreciate or know about even.
What about his mocking the waiter?
What's that?
What about House mocking the waiter? There was this stupid waiter that only knew a couple of words, allegedly, and Howe and Ned decided to make fun of him while waiting for Falstaff's company to come back.
That could just be, the arrogance of youth, but I think it's significant that he is responsible with the money. I think that shows a lot of. I think that's a completely different thing. His personality, obviously, he's only a kid. He's going to poke fun at people. That's a sign of immaturity in one area, but I think that he's covering for Falstaff. He's covering his debts. I think is very significant as to Prince Hal's character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll get to Falstaff in a bit. There's quite a lot to talk about him.
Yeah,
but let's move on to your Zoom then.
You're going to email us that, and we'll.
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
Okay, so let's just wait for your email and switch there.
Okay.
And see you in a bit.
And I'll just leave you guys right now and come back on my page.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's join him.
Okay. Bear with us a second while we switch accounts.
Would you mind allowing me to share my screen?
Sure, let's see.
You have to click next to share screen and then allow all participants to share or something like that.
So I'm on my phone. I'm having laptop issues. So.
Oh, okay.
I don't know how to do that for my. Let's see. Share. Oh, share.
Multiple participants can share, or I don't remember how it was called exactly. Or you can make me a host. That also works.
I didn't do that.
Mark and I were discussing we're discussing the difference between Hotspur and Howe, and also the similarities, and also what qualities make a good leader, which is one of the main topics of the whole Henriette. So who should rule? The one that is born king, or the one that is better suited? So in other words, meritocracy versus having a royal family.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of a difficult concept for people to appreciate in the 21st century, where pretty much every country that performs Shakespeare is a democracy, and we don't recognize the idea of divine right of kings. That even countries that have a monarchy, that even the UK, where the monarchy is symbolic and the real power is with the elected parliament. It's hard for us to relate to, but he is definitely going with a concept that was unique to his time about who should be the ruler.
People could still relate to people who get high offices without necessarily earning them through nepotism and so forth, and certainly everybody can identify with others not getting what they feel they're themselves getting not getting what they think they deserved or they've earned. And I think there is the universality in the piece and in the plays, because again, Shakespeare portrays everyone as flesh and blood human beings. Again, Henry, father, might not be the legitimate claimant to the throne, which again, you don't have to be lived your life in a monarchy to understand that. He seized power that he might not rightfully should have. And I think those those themes are what makes these plays continue to be popular. That's what I think.
Yeah. I still can't share my screen, by the way.
What's that?
I still can't share my screen, by the way.
Yeah, let me see. Let me see if I can make you co-host. Yeah, because again, if I wasn't having these...
Or if you make me the host, I will accept everybody that wants to join.
Yeah, I can't, I don't know. I can't do that from here. Let's see.
Okay, then do you have the normal Zoom menu on your phone, or does it look differently? Does it look different?
Different. It's different.
Different.
Oh, wait a minute. Let's try this. No, that's not going to work. Yeah, I've been having share drive, Box, photos, documents, bookmarks. Oh, here it is. Share screen. Let's see if that works. Try that. Nope.
If you go to
participants, if you slide your screen, then you can see all three of us. You just slide your screen. Well, I'm on my phone now. I can see all three of you. Mm-hmm. I just slid my screen. So let me do this with you. Uh-oh. Nope, I can't. Nope.
I could put the questions into the chat, but I sometimes show some quotes on my screen because it's easier to just.
You can just read the question and then we'll.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. So the next question is: it seems like everyone in the play has something to say about the concept of honor. What is honor anyway? How is it defined throughout the play? Is it a good thing, just a silly idea, or something else? We know the famous monologue by Falstaff.
Honor is a mere
escutcheon, but he's not the only one that.
Yeah, well, in his context, of course, he'd say it would be being courage, which, of course, I mean, I think the idea is that they create the character of Falstaff not just for comic relief, but to show the contrast of somebody who has no honor whatsoever, and Hal gives the impression of being the same both in terms of being a bum and of having no honor, and yet it's the final battle that establishes, again, what we were saying in response to the first question, the fact that he acts like he's just like Falstaff, but when push comes to shove, when it's crunch time, he will come through and not be a bum. He will come through and show that he does have honor and is able to distance himself from this guy with no honor. It could mean the bravery, the fact that Falstaff has no courage. It also could mean in terms of keeping your word and so forth, fighting for what you believe is right. And I think both question 1 and 2 brings up this question about, are you honorable because you courageously fight for something, and or because you keep your word? You said, this is who I'm loyal to, and I'm not going to break my word to him. I'm going to fight for it. In which case, of course, both Hotspur and Hal have honor. Hotspur valiantly fights for Mortimer's claim to the throne. But again, it brings up the irony of the fact that, today we would have the concern about, okay, were you fighting, how courageously and loyally were you fighting for your cause? That's what was all important at the time, versus today we'd have a lot more concern about, okay, but were you fighting for the right side? There's a lot, Shakespeare wouldn't have had that.
Which side is the right one? I don't think it's unequivocal in the play.
You're right. It's not, and that's what makes it interesting. The fact that Hotspur and Hal can be presented as being equally honorable, because and like today when we talk about the side that storms the Capitol because their side didn't win. We would think it would be. Unfortunately, it's not an open and shut question about it's dishonorable to fight for that when your candidate lost and he does not have the claim to the throne. The other guy got more votes, but Shakespeare didn't have a concept of that. He lived in a time when, maybe both candidates had an equal claim, and the important thing is not who had more votes, which determines who's on the right side, but who courageously fights for it, has the courage to.
In a way, it depends on how many soldiers they had. So two of Hotspur's allies didn't show up.
That's a very good point. I mean, you brought up the point about saying the example about Hotspur having the people that betrayed Hotspur are the people that have no honor. The idea is the fact that both sides, we're assuming here, both sides have an equal claim to being on the right side. It's up in the air about who's on the right side, and the play doesn't examine that. It examines who is honorable in fighting for what they consider the right side, and the fact that the people that betrayed him, that did not show up, we would assume Shakespeare is on the side of Hal, but he at least acknowledges, if you were loyal to the other side, breaking your word to them is what makes you dishonorable, much more than being on the side that we might today consider not right. It's not choosing a side to be loyal to and sticking to it, fighting for them even if they're losing, even if you're losing, even if you're going to get yourself killed, being all the things that Falstaff is not.
I think honor, is an obviously a fairly abstract concept, and it's an attempt by civilization to codify what it means to maintain civilization, that you just can't do whatever you want, you can't behave however you want to. But I think in this particular point in history, as we've said, both sides have an equal, one could say, it's easy to justify being on either side and the ambiguity of that, and perhaps, the allies that I didn't know that two of Hotspur's allies didn't show up. But they could have easily justified it by saying, well, we changed our minds. We decided that the other guy had the claim to the throne after all, and decided to stay out of it. So it's also gives the people at the top some moral wiggle room, that it is a fairly honor. One man's honor is another man's dishonor.
And then there's Falstaff, who is a survivor. He doesn't care about honor. He cares about
Hal. He cares about Hal. That is his king. That is
yes, because he can take advantage of Hal when Hal becomes king.
Well, I think that's a matter of interpretation.
Why? Why do you think that he really cares for Hal, the person, and not Hal, the future king?
I think he takes pride in that this is sort of the guy he believes is grooming for the throne. He's his kind of guy. He goes out and he whores, and drinks, and he's
This is because he can take advantage because he can merit from.
Again, as an actor, I'll say that's a matter of interpretation. You can interpret it one way or the other. I think if you just interpret it that he's just looking to have someone he can take advantage of, that's kind of,
or somebody that's comfortable to be among your friends, to be able to call a friend.
Yeah, well, I think they consider each other friends, at least at this point. So again, there's Hal paying off all of Falstaff's debts. I do believe there's an affection. between the two men.
Okay.
Which changes when Hal becomes king, of course. But no, I don't. I think he takes great pleasure in Hal's company.
But in his company, yes. But think of how Falstaff recruits soldiers. So he has this of 100 out of 150 soldiers. He says that they only have 1.5 shirts, one of which is stolen, and the other half is two napkins tied together.
Yes, well, he's gotten lazy, no question about it. But you got to remember,
it wasn't laziness; it was avarice. So he took bribes from people that could afford not to go to the army, and he took whoever was left.
Yes,
and he did the same thing in the next Henry, in the part 2. So if he really cared for Hal or for his cause, wouldn't he recruit soldiers that could fight?
Well, on the other hand, he would have done that. That's also a motivation for taking advantage of Hal. If he really wanted to take advantage of Hal, he would have made sure Hal had enough men too. So I think that's a separate issue. I don't have an answer as to why he did that. But I don't think that's an indication that he just wanted to manipulate Hal, because if he did, he would have made sure that he would have done everything in his power to make sure Hal won.
He wanted instant gratification. He could take some money immediately, and
because that's another thing. He was in debt. Well, another thing is he, as far as he knew, he was in debt. He didn't know how he was paying off his debts. So that's another thing. He needed the money, and that's another thing. We're always ready to trade honor for money if we're in a desperate situation. Now, had he known Hal was paying off his debts, would he have taken the money? Maybe, maybe not. Obviously, at this point in his life, he's looking to live the easy life. I mean, he's but at one point, but he did get to be a knight somehow. You don't get to be a knight unless you display some degree of honor at some point. So how did he become a knight in the first place?
I think maybe I would have to disagree with that. That might be what the play is suggesting, the fact that it's hereditary, the fact that he was born to a noble family and so forth, and I mean, I don't disagree completely, just a little bit, that the fact that you're right, that everybody, even if they're born into a noble family, would have to show some degree of courage and honor. But I think Shakespeare, if he were alive, would suggesting the idea of making him such a comic character that is a buffoon. I think he would suggest that you're supposed to, in order to become a knight, you're supposed to show honor, but maybe it's because of the circumstances of his birth, like Hal or whatever, that somehow he slipped through the cracks. And
but at the end, as you say,
and it's easy to do so if you're.
He goes into combat. He willingly goes into combat, which at his age,
he takes sack to the combat.
Yes, but he goes into he could have easily avoided the battle, which tells me that he'd been in combat before.
Yes, out of necessity.
Mm-hmm. And we could probably assume that when he was in combat before, he behaved similarly to the way that we see him behave here, of pretending, stabbing people that are already dead and claiming.
I think that's a matter of interpretation. I think if I were to play Falstaff, I wouldn't interpret that way. I mean, yes, he's this way. When you get older, you get more common sense as to whether or not your survival instincts get stronger, which is why from time immemorial, soldiers have been recruited from a young age. A general, I went to a book signing with Bob Kerry, and he said a 3-star general. He asked a 3-star general, "Why don't you recruit older guys? I'm willing to fight." And the general said, "You give me a guy 18 to 22 years old, and you give me control of how much food he gets and how much sleep he gets, and I guarantee you he'll do whatever I tell him to do." And that's been the age range of soldiers from time immemorial. So let's say Falstaff was recruited, did see combat at that age, and has that memory, if you will, muscle memory. Yes, he's more clever, he's more cognizant of his own safety, but I don't think he would have ever gone near a battlefield if he hadn't displayed some kind of courage early on. I mean, he could have easily avoided that battle and claimed to have been in it after the fact.
Since we're
he was just a buffoon, as you say, if he was just meant to be a buffoon.
Since we're discussing Falstaff, let's proceed with the next question, which is as follows. Falstaff is one of the most talked about characters in literary history. What makes his character so appealing? And before we start answering it, I would like to read you some quotes from literary critics regarding Falstaff. So one of them is that there are more references to the Fat Knight up until the end of the 18th century than to any other literary character. To him, order is less important than freedom. Patriotism is less valuable than fellowship. Honor is less desirable than laughter. Pleasure, not virtue, inspires him. Individual appetite, not social good, drives him on. Further on, we have, in the 20th century, Falstaff was increasingly recognized as a universal figure, an archetypal myth belonging to all ages and nations. His ancestry was traced back to the Greek Silenus, as well as to Santa Claus, to the folklore of ancient Egypt, as well as of Islam, Mesopotamia, India, China, and Russia, and the magnificent relevance of Falstaff in all stages of Western and Eastern culture was finally acknowledged. Then we go to critics writing about King Henry V that say, the truth is that we never could forgive the prince's treatment of Falstaff. And another critic says, we wish Henry a glorious reign and much joy with his crew of hypocritical politicians, lay and clerical. But our hearts go with Falstaff to the fleet, or, if necessary, to Arthur's bosom, or wheresoever he is. So he's.
Oh, by the way, I've activated the screen share. Has that done anything? By the way, I found the screen.
Okay, now I can share. Ah, perfect. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
You should be seeing some questions.
So the answer, the question, I think we see that
question
different characters of Shakespeare mean different things from different eras. Different way, and that's a reflection. I think of how we see ourselves in these characters at whatever point in history we are in our lives. I guess we wish we could live the life of Falstaff. It's, having this king as his patron and just going around seeking pleasure. And because unfortunately we have a civilization that does not value pleasure. It values work, it values honor, it values everything except pleasure. And I think we sort of envy that in Falstaff, that he's always Hugh Hefner was said of Playboy. They said what Playboy is the celebration of pleasure, and he said, you know what? I've never understood the concept behind the celebration of pain. And I think again, and of course, if Falstaff were in another time, I'm sure he'd find his way to the Playboy Mansion.
Definitely, he takes no responsibility, and he's a survivor.
Yes.
And would you like to examine how he enters the play? Let's. Just a second. What time of day it is? Okay. Oh wait, I'm tired of playing. Second. This is his first line. Now how? What time of day is it, lad? And this line is significant. So from the very beginning, we find out that Falstaff and How are friends. You don't ask your boss, you don't ask the prince what time of the day it is unless you're friends with them, and you don't call them lad. And one other important characteristic of Falstaff is that he's a master of puns, and he opens with a 5-fold and a 4-fold pun within several lines, and I would like to discuss them. So here is what he says later on. Indeed, you come near me now, how? For we that take purses go by the moon and the 7 stars, and not by Phoebus, he that wandering night so far. And a pretty, sweet wag, when thou art king, as God save thy grace, majesty, I should say, for grace will thou have none. So here, let's examine this phrase, go by the moon and the 7 stars, and then grace. according to the ardent Shakespeare, this phrase has the following meanings. So go by can mean walk by the light of, navigate by, and tell time by. In addition, the moon and the seven stars was an inn in London during Shakespeare's time. So we get two additional meanings, namely to stop in at and to pass in front of. And later on, when he talks about Grace, House Grace, Grace can mean the following. It is the standard term of respect for royalty. It is a theological term for unmerited divine assistance. It is social charm and the blessing before a meal. And this last meaning is what Falstaff plays on with, he says, no, by my troth, not so much as will serve to be prologue to an egg and butter. And later on in his dialogue, there are numerous twofold and threefold puns. So basically he starts with a lot of puns. His character is already well developed within, 50 lines of the play, of his entrance, or maybe even less. We know that he's friends with the king. We know that he's a thief. We know that he is masterful with the language, and that tells already a lot without us having seen any action.
So there's maybe more to him than meets the eye, even though Prince Hal's able to fool him later on in the robbery.
Yes, and Falstaff doesn't care. So if you pay attention to how he lies, he usually ends up being the victim of his own lies. So, and he doesn't really care. He's not an evil person.
Oh, no. But I think he does care about certain things. I mean, obviously, he cares about his own pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he cares about Prince Hal. I do think he cares about his country to an extent. But again, he puts a priority on his own pleasure. He's Roman in a lot of ways, because Romans, they conquered, they achieved, they worked, but they also had their pleasure. They prided themselves. They cultivated themselves on their pleasure. And I think you said his lineage traced back to Rome. Did you say that? Because I think there's a lot of Roman in him. I think he's Roman too.
And Shakespeare frequently uses the Roman names of the Greek gods, which is also interesting. So in his time, people were claiming to be Christians, be it Protestants or Catholics, but they also used the Roman gods when they suited them better. So I find it interesting. And let's go back to the questions.
Also, the fact that he doesn't even know the time of day shows that he woke up and he had a long nap and he doesn't know anything because he
sleeps all day. And
what's that?
that he sleeps most of the day, and when he wakes up, hasn't.
Yeah. And question 3: analyze the complex character of Prince Hal. What are his intentions? What are his motives? To discuss fully this topic, you can and should make reference to Hal as we find him in Henry IV, Part 2, and Henry V.
I think I kind of already addressed that when I said that what it brings up. In order to really understand that, you have to look ahead to him and Henry V about the great upon the king monologue, where he's reflecting on his responsibilities. That explains why he behaved the way he did when he was young, because he knew what was ahead of him. Shows the connecting thread between the guy that we first see in Henry IV Part 1 to who he becomes 2 plays later in the cycle.
Mm-hmm. And we also see his plan also already in Act 1, Scene 2. So when this loose behavior I throw off and pay the debt I never promised it. By how much better than my word I am, by so much shall I falsify men's hopes. And like bright metal on a sullen ground, my reformation, glittering all my fault, shall show more goodly and attract more eyes than that which had no foil to set it off. So his whole reformation has always been a part of his plan.
Yes.
He actually has to reform himself twice. For some reason, his father forgets his first reformation in the next play.
Well, I think one of the things he's doing when hanging out with Falstaff and the people he's encountering is to acclimate himself to the rank and file, that he's not cloistering himself at court so that he can be king of all the people. That's why he's able to, before the Battle of Agincourt, disguise himself and relate to the rank and file. I think he doesn't want to be an elitist king who just cares about the aristocracy. He wants to really get to know the rank and file subjects, his rank and file subjects, and he does that through Falstaff.
Okay. Let's proceed. Mark, would you like to read the next question? Number 5.
Okay. Hotspur laments, "It were an easy leap to pluck bright honor from the pale-faced moon, or dive into the bottom of the deep, where a fathom line could never touch the ground, and pluck up drowned honor by the locks. Analyze Hotspur's grandiose notion of honor and compare it to Prince Hal's own conception of honor." It seems like we already addressed this in question 1.
Yeah, we've discussed this.
I could answer it, but I think I'd be repeating myself mostly. I don't know if anybody has anything to add.
I don't think they're that different. I mean, I really don't.
Okay, then, Vincent, would you like to read the next question, number 6?
Okay, many critics of the play argue that in the final analysis, Shakespeare has failed to make Prince Hal a convincing character. We are to conclude that Hal has every virtue that makes both a great ruler and a great man: honesty, bravery, loyalty, generosity, intelligence, compassion, etc. In addition to accepting that he has no flaws with which to counter those virtues, flaws that would make him a realistic character, do you agree that Hal is too good to be true? Is it really true that Shakespeare makes Hal flawless, make references to Hal's relationships with his father and Falstaff in your answer?
I'm a little perplexed by this question because I think what we've talked about before illustrates. I mean, I don't know how anybody could say that they think Hal is too good to be true. The fact that bringing in Falstaff and all the stuff we said about him being a bum when he's young, it's something else. It's something else like what I said before about Shakespeare taking liberties to make Hotspur and Hal the same age when in fact Hotspur was older than the father. That maybe even his rebellious youth and so forth might not even been true. It may very well have been just something that Shakespeare made up, and if he did, it was for the purpose of making him more real, making him more relatable, making sure that his character is not too good to be true, even if leaving out the youth with Falstaff would have been possibly truer to real life history. It would have made it less interesting because they want to show, it makes for the story of his Reformation, makes for him being a complex character who is not too good to be true, which all writers are told, make your characters more complex, and Shakespeare does that. So I disagree with the question based on everything we've said. I don't think that. I think Hal is, not too good to be true for the very reasons that we've talked about. That we show the conflict, we show his behavior with Falstaff as opposed to his behavior for his father.
But I think the question asks, where are his flaws? Where do you find his flaws? And I think that's a valid question. I don't find any flaws, at least not off the top of my head.
I think so you're saying that the being the bum who hangs out with Falstaff and commits robberies and so forth, that doesn't count as a flaw. You're thinking in terms of the honor question when it comes to that.
But again, I think, well, no, not necessarily not the robberies, but again, the hanging out with Falstaff is twofold. One, he enjoys sowing his oats with Falstaff, and two, he wants to be around the rank and file. But I think the robberies certainly qualify as flaws, but not the overall hang out with him. as you put it, being a bum. I don't think it's being a bum at all. I think it's being very wise in hanging and exposing oneself to the rank and file.
But what about later on when he does become a king and suddenly changes completely?
Yes,
isn't it a little bit hypocritical?
Yes, I agree. Yes, I believe. Yes, I think he is being hypocritical when he just tosses off Falstaff, because he's only 25, 26. And that's kind of also, the arrogance of youth taking, I don't need anyone. I don't need a teacher anymore. I've learned everything I need to learn. Yes, I agree. So I disagree. I disagree with the conclusion that he's too good to be true. So,
well, this is a question.
Maybe a paragon, but
this is a question. You say, do you agree that how is too good to be true? Is it really true that Shakespeare makes how flawless? So this is a part of the question.
We found at least 2 flaws, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one. Discuss the character King Henry IV. How does he relate to his son? Does he handle his political affairs effectively? We covered this before you joined us, by the way.
I think the big connecting thread with his character that I wanted to show when I tried to condense it into a play where this just focuses on Bolingbroke, you have to read all 3 plays to see his character arc, which is frustrating to me. But the idea, the guilt about usurping the throne, the fact that at the time we didn't, they weren't in a democracy where we could think about your claim to leadership be based on support of the people. Even though Richard II definitely had lost the support of the people, today that would be unquestionable as a reason why he should have been removed from office. But back then, both men had an equal claim to the throne morally, and so he always had guilt about that he wants to be a good ruler, but he also consistently has a guilt about that. The fact that he says he's going to mount a crusade as his penance for doing that, and the fact that we see his continuing to the rebellions that come up. He finishes Richard II by vowing to do that crusade. He begins Henry IV Part 1 by vowing to do that crusade. Then he hears about the rebellion that says, well, this puts off our plan for the crusade. And then on his deathbed, when he reflects on that, he always regretted, they said, the room is Jerusalem. I always said I was going to die in Jerusalem, and makes the reference to that. The fact that that's a connecting thread. The fact that on the one, he's torn between the fact that he wants to justify that he's a good ruler, that he has a right to the throne, which is going to involve doing penance for the sin against his cousin. But on the other, keeping power versus keeping power by putting down the rebellions of the Hotspurs and so forth is in such direct conflict with justifying the power by doing the crusade as his penance, and ultimately he has to choose the former over the latter, and he dies regretting it.
I think also, the question is also raises, it explores is, what do you do when you have an inept king? Do you overthrow him? Which, of course, it's interesting where that's the same question where that is faced in Henry VI, who was inept. So, and ironically, and I think this is something we can relate to, ironically, it was a lot of ironies here, because after 4 years of, if we were a monarchy and we had somebody as incompetent as Trump, who could just raise an army and overthrow him. But because we were in a democracy, we were handcuffed for 4 years. Like, we can't storm the Capitol. That would be a bad thing. We can't get him out. We can't cut any legal corners. For 4 years, people tried. They investigated him. They did all the report. But ironically, because we were in a democracy, we had to let him rule for 4 years and then vote him out. Whereas in a monarchy, and this goes to honor. Like, Henry felt it was his duty to overthrow Richard because he was an incompetent king. And yes, of course, he felt guilt about that. I recently had an experience on Facebook where I voiced an unpopular opinion, and it actually hurt people's feelings. And I thought, well, I feel bad about that, but I'd rather hurt somebody with a lie than comfort somebody. I would rather hurt somebody with the truth than comfort them with a lie.
It's about the second question here. Does he handle his political affairs effectively? Well, yes and no. So on the one hand, he is a relatively successful leader because he has managed to hold the throne for I don't know how many years, and he does so until his deathbed. But on the other hand, it was due to luck that he didn't die in the battle. So two of Hotspur's friends didn't show up. So there were significantly fewer soldiers to fight and to fight against. And then again, he wasn't really expecting his son to help him. And Howe killed Hotspur, the main antagonist, the main enemy. So he had some luck, at least in the battle that is depicted in this play. But then again, who can guarantee their rule for an infinite amount of time? There were wars. Wars were pretty frequent back in the day. And rebellions.
Well, they are actually called the Wars of the Roses, not the War of the Roses. There were several for several reasons. But and another example, they say that's why Netanyahu is bombing Hamas to keep himself in power. That was a great way to stay in power. But also, ironically, Prince Hal was outnumbered at Agincourt. He won anyway. So, and who knows?
Outnumbered majorly. That was the point of the play. The fact that they were so outnumbered. It was
so exaggerated.
It was so unbelievable. The fact that the English would win that battle. That's why it became so something to be so melodramatic about as the focus of his play.
With 25 casualties in total, being outnumbered 5-1. This was a huge exaggeration by Shakespeare. 10,000 French people died and 25 English people died. Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay, next question. Mark, would you like to read it?
Outline the history of the literary patterns in the traditional morality play and discuss why Henry IV Part 1 itself could be considered a morality play.
Let's focus on the second part. So why is it a morality play?
I'm not sure if I know the exact definition, but if they say to teach a moral story, I mean, it might take us back to question number 1 about honor, teaching about that, and one about how you should have honor, you should be like whatever you fight for, whatever side you're on, you should be like Hotspur or Hal, not like Falstaff with no honor. And back to that question about the honor, since Vincent brought it up again, the connection to today with the storming the Capitol. I mean, since it's okay to since you brought it up, I'll not refrain from it because I've been thinking about this ever since we discussed question number 1 about how Shakespeare, it would be a foreign idea to Shakespeare about the argument about who's on the right side being determined by who got the most votes, but what would not be foreign to him is the concept of having honor. We don't know who's on the. I'm not going to make a judgment about which candidate should be president, but the question is, were you honorable in fighting for that? And according to that, I mean, the people that stormed the Capitol don't qualify on that category either. I mean, I'm going to storm the Capitol. I got maced. They used that. Oh, they're in prison for. Oh yeah, it's almost like they're being punished for committing treason. I mean, it's like Shakespeare understood that. He says, well, okay, whether you're on the right side, well, I don't know that, but it's, are you honorable? Do you realize, okay, are you going to lead a rebellion and so forth? Okay, lead the rebellion, but don't be a damn coward about it. Don't be surprised when they used mace against you when you do it. That if you're going to lead a rebellion to overthrow the leader and put your person in power by force, you better be prepared for the consequence. And you know that. You know you're going to get yourself killed. You're going to know that and at the time they knew the consequence was not just a lot worse than a lot worse than what they're talking about happening to the people that stormed the Capitol. I mean, we're talking hanged, drawn, and quartered. You know what happened to William Wallace that we saw in Braveheart. That's the consequence. And you know, being honorable is storming the Capitol, knowing that, you know, hey, I'm going to do this, but if I lose, not only could I get myself killed in doing this, do I have the courage, but I know the consequences. I know what's going to happen if I'm not successful in this, you know, the courage that they show there. So that's another issue where he's not taking a moralistic stance on who's on the right side, but he definitely is taking a moralistic stand on being honorable. You know, the fact that both sides think they're on the right side, that's not what's at issue. The issue is, are you honorable? Are you brave about it? Are you willing? Are you saying, okay, you believe that your guy has the superior claim to the throne? Are you willing to give your life for it? Are you willing to fight bravely for it and keep your word to that person and not change your word to the person because looks like the other guy's, you know, like the Duke of York does in Richard II, you know, he suddenly changes who he's loyal to. He changes who he's loyal to based on who's winning, and betting on the winning horse. Not being the person that does that, not being the person that whines that what happened to you when your attempt to install your person by force was unsuccessful.
Well, I never thought of this as a morality play until that question was posed. But as you were talking, Mark, I was thinking I'm reading the autobiography of Frederick Douglass, and he knew John Brown intimately, and he unequivocally depicts John Brown as a man of honor.
Yeah, that's a very good example. I hadn't thought of that. I think it's a good example of what I just talked about. He knew he suffered he faced the consequences of what he did bravely. He knew, he believed it, and exactly he knew he was committing treason, but he was proud and he was prepared to accept the consequences.
And the irony is that when the whole Confederate statue thing was going on, there was this thing NPR, the historians talking about, and they said, one of them said, they say history is written by the winners, but that's not the case in the American Civil War. Somehow the Confederacy took over the narrative that it was not about slavery, that Robert E. Lee was this honorable man caught in dishonorable circumstances. And then part of that, I think, is John Brown's always been depicted as a well-intended madman, a fanatic and unstable, who took the law into his own hands. But Frederick Douglass takes totally dishes that whole thing. He was a man who had an intimidating personality, but he knew what he was doing. He was a man of honor, as you say. He knew the consequences, and he knew he was going to die. He was not going to leave Virginia alive. And incidentally, they tried to arrest Frederick Douglass for the raid on Harper's Ferry because of his association with Brown. He had to flee to Canada, even though he had nothing to do with the raid. But anyway, point being,
who had to flee to Canada?
Yes, he had to flee to Canada.
Who Frederick Douglass?
Yes.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Because of his association, and they had absolutely nothing to do with the raid, but that there was correspondence between and other abolitionists and John Brown. So they felt that he had incited it. He had helped incite it. Which ironically is what we're using to try to put Trump away, but that's not the same.
I know.
Again, whose side are you on?
How they define incitement when it comes to Frederick Douglass versus...
Yeah. That he totally supported John Brown in anything that he did and everything that he did, and before the fact, I think that's the case. They tried to expedite him, and because they had a slave-friendly president, Buchanan, who was conspiring with the governor of Virginia to expedite him, to arrest him and expedite him to Virginia. But getting back to the play, I think that's probably what does make it a morality play, that the characters have a moral choice to make, and they do make the correct choice. And again, Henry IV doesn't think he thinks his son is a liability, but in fact his son turns out to be his greatest asset because of his son's moral fiber, which he doesn't think he has, which the father doesn't think the son has, because he's bumming around with Falstaff.
Okay. So let's answer this question next. Discuss the development of the comedic subplot and how it relates to the overall play. Well, I think that this plot makes the play all the more interesting to watch and to read.
Absolutely. Or else it's just a melodrama, just a family melodrama.
And you have this huge dichotomy between how he's supposed to do and what he does.
And he's such a contrast with everybody else in the play, especially physically. He's this fat, lazy old guy around a bunch of people who are just overthrew a king, and they're all serious and.
See what Falstaff says about him. Shall the blessed son of heaven prove a miker and eat blackberries? A question not to be asked. Shall the son of England prove a thief and take purses? A question to be asked. And moreover, if you just want to go to a theater after a hard day of work, maybe you don't want to contemplate too much on what's going on there. Maybe you want to have fun, and
absolutely,
this is what you get from Falstaff and company.
Well, that's what makes it for a great play. You have a comic relief. You have something in there to relieve the tension, and certainly Shakespeare was a master at that.
Yeah,
somebody pointed out Romeo and Juliet is a comedy until Mercutio dies.
Yeah. I think that the question brings up a good point about, is a character going to be used for comic relief, or are we going to dwell on that character? And I think that really illustrates the idea that why Henry IV Part 1 is one of Shakespeare's most popular plays. Most people think it is one of his best, and Henry IV Part 2 is really not one of his better plays in most critics' opinions. I think it's because Falstaff was so popular a character for his and so therefore he decided, well, I'm going to give him a lot more. He takes up way too much of the play in Henry IV Part 2, in my opinion. I think that's one of the reasons why it's such an inferior play to Part 1. And I think it also raises the broader question that we could talk about when we talk about the argument about, should artists be subsidized versus should they should only supply and demand determine what audiences get. I think he presents a really good argument for why the people that say, oh, everything should just be determined by supply and demand, artists should never be subsidized. I think this is such an illustration of why they're wrong, because yes, Shakespeare had to depend on supply and demand to be successful. And I think this is the ultimate example of where his work is inferior because of it. He realizes, well, we got to give the audience what they want. They loved Falstaff so much in Part 1, so he basically he gave him way too much of a role in Part 2, and he even wrote one of my very least favorite plays, Merry Wives of Windsor, to let him dominate the play. It's boring to me. I don't like that play very much.
Why don't you like Merry Wives?
I don't know. And I think the rumor is that they say the rumor is that Queen Elizabeth I loved Falstaff so much that she personally requested Shakespeare to write a play based just on Falstaff, and that was the basis of Merry Wives of Windsor. So, I mean, and I think it's, the other thing is just providing comic relief is one thing, but having that dominate the play is not good. That it takes away from it being comic relief if he's the main character. If he's a supporting role, he can the fact that the comedic part is, like the question says, a subplot, is what makes him a lot more appealing in part 1 than he was in part 2 or in The Merry Wives of Windsor. At least that's
I think first of all, it depends on the genre. Merry Wives of Windsor was a comedy, so if you're going to make the main character in a comedy, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the second part, Chimes at Midnight is, I think, one of the greatest Shakespearean movies ever made. I don't know if you agree with that, but or if you've seen it. Do you know what I'm?
Orson Welles, where he takes parts,
yes,
focuses just on Falstaff from
Yes. In fact, Orson Welles said if he had to show one of his movies to get into heaven, that would be the movie he'd show. So he obviously thought highly of it. But I think it works as with Falstaff as the central character. It's a very well made movie, and Falstaff is the main character.
I don't think you can have too much Falstaff, to be honest. He's so funny. I believe.
And if you haven't seen Chimes at Midnight, it's very good.
Okay. I believe we've covered most important questions. They kind of overlap. Oh, okay. Let's tackle one more. Can teenagers today relate to Prince Hal and the dramatic change he undergoes in the play? Why or why not? Well, you can, so. Because up until you graduate from university, you're more or less trying to live the life to the full, and then when you stop having just part-time jobs but switch to full-time, then there's a watershed change in your life.
I think everybody can relate to that. The idea is that everybody's got to grow up, and the fact that by choosing a character whom that struggle that we all go through is so extreme, the fact that you grow up and you're going to have to assume your adult responsibilities, the stuff that I had already said about how, he knows from childhood that the responsibilities he takes, at least when his father dies, are going to be so extreme. It's just expressing in a extreme sense the kind of struggle that all young people go for, and I think that's why he's such a relatable character. Everyone knows that when they're young, they have wild oats to sow, but they're going to have to grow up someday and assume their responsibilities.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's Shakespeare's genius. He made everybody flesh and blood human beings, including kings, princes, and I think you have to ask them. You never know what young people are going to say. But I think they would very, very easily relate to him, especially the last scene in Henry V, which is my favorite scene in all of Shakespeare, with this brave warrior.
Which one? Which scene did you say is your favorite?
The last scene in Henry V, where he's this brave warrior, and he can't look this beautiful woman in the eye and tell her that he loves her.
Oh, the Catherine and Henry scene. Oh, okay, yeah.
In fact, in Chuck Yeager's autobiography, he talks about he was this brilliant fighter pilot. He was only 22 when he got back from World War II. He shot down 13 planes. He escaped. He got shot down. He escaped from the Germans by getting in the French underground. He dragged himself and a wounded guy over the Pyrenees Mountains. And when he got home to ask his girlfriend to marry him, he couldn't do it. He says, "Okay, pack your bags. We're going to go to get on a train and meet my parents." And she says, "Okay, I'll do all this. You mind telling me why we're doing this?" And he just looked at her and said, "Why do you think?" And I'm like, "Hey, that's Henry V right there." Guy did these incredibly brave things, but he just couldn't ask the girl to marry him. And that's basically Henry V.
Well, it depends on the way you act it. So in the Shakespeare's Globe edition, this scene was portrayed in a very humorous way. It appeared as if Hal knew what he was doing perfectly well. It was part of his game, and he succeeded in doing so. But you can act it in a different way and portray Hal as somebody who is inept at seducing women.
I think, though, that's not the way I would do it, because he really had all the power. She didn't really have a say in whether or not she was going to marry him. So if you give him all the power throughout the scene, there's really no scene. There's really no conflict. But that's my interpretation. Because she was going to have to marry him no matter what.
Yeah, it was certain, yes. Well, that's it. Thank you very much for the lovely discussion. I learned a lot.
Sorry for the technical issues. I'll try to get them resolved by tomorrow.
Okay.
It's all right.
Yeah, and I'll see Vincent. I'll see you tomorrow for the. Look forward to that. Two gentlemen. Alex, are you going to be joining us for that too?
No, it's too late for me.
Oh, okay. And Alex, I'll see you in a little bit. Wheel of Shakespeare, and Vincent, you're always welcome to join us in that as well. But
yes, I will definitely one day do that.
Okay.
When is it? When is it? It's Saturdays, obviously. What time?
Saturday.
40 minutes.
It'll be 3 o'clock your time, noon my time, every Saturday.
And by the way, when would you like to discuss the next play, or do you want to discuss it first?
Which one do you want to do next? Henry V? Or?
Yeah, Henry IV, Part 2.
Oh, I thought we were doing 1 and 2 today together, but
no. Yeah, I thought so too. But, anytime,
anytime. I think this worked very well doing, because you said not wanting to conflict with Wheel of Shakespeare by doing it on the same day. Actually, by doing it with Wheel of Shakespeare and just doing it 2 hours earlier than we do Wheel of Shakespeare, I think it worked out perfectly. And right now I got 40 minutes. I can get a bite to eat and so forth to get ready for that. So it worked out fine for me, and probably for you too, that allowing us to do both Saturdays.
In about a month, or when?
That's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, I like the idea of, and maybe a month, and I like the idea of doing Saturdays 2 hours before our usual time for Wheel of Shakespeare.
Yeah, it appears to work for everybody. Okay. All right, then see you in a month.
Okay. See. Well, I'll see you both sooner.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Bye.